And we're continuing with the sixth chapter of Greenwitch. Um, Simon and Barney have escaped the Dark Man's trailer. We don't think the spell worked on Simon quite as well as it did on Barney, and Simon is very, very upset and hopes they can find Merriman. Meanwhile, Will and Merriman know that Simon and Barney have been with the Dark and are hoping they can turn it to their advantage, but they're kind of humoring Jane by not telling her that they know what's up, because they really can't, and they are up on Kamar Head looking for the two brothers. "They might have climbed down into the next bay to the rocks at the bottom," Jane said. "Let's go and see." "All right." "Wait," Merriman said as they turned in surprise. He raised an arm and pointed inland, back along the headland toward the silent gray group of standing stones that overlooked Truissic Bay. For a moment Jane noticed nothing. Then she saw a patch of brownish red moving toward them very fast, a patch that resolved itself in a few minutes into the form of a desperately running dog. "Rufus!" The red setter skidded to a halt in front of them, panting, trying to bark in odd little gasping, coughing sounds. "He's always rushing from nowhere, trying to tell people things," said Jane helplessly, crouching to rub his head. "If only he could talk. Want to come with us, Rufus? Want to come help find Barney and Simon?" But it was very soon clear that Rufus wanted nothing but to persuade them to go back along the headland the way they had come. He jumped and whined and barked, and so they followed him. As they came closer to the standing stones, the great gray monoliths of granite, in their lonely group on the windy grass, they saw coming toward them from the village Simon, Barney, and Captain Tom. They were moving slowly, the old man still hobbling with a stick. Jane could sense the suppressed impatience in the boy's deliberate pace. Merriman stood beside the standing stones as they came up to him. He looked only at Simon, and he said, "Well?" "So he poured a little drop of some sort of oil into the Grail," Simon said, "so that it floated to the top of the water, and Barney had to sit down and stare at it." "Sit down?" Barney said. "Where?" "At the table in the caravan. It was all dark except for this funny kind of green light coming from the ceiling." "I don't remember any green light, and for goodness sake, Simon, I'd remember if I'd seen the Grail even for a second, and I know I didn't." "Barney!" Simon said. His voice shook with strain, and he leant against the nearest standing stone. "Will you shut up?" You were in a spell of some sort, and you don't remember anything." "Yes, I do. I remember everything we did there. But there was hardly anything. I mean, we were only there a minute or two for me to get my drawing, and I never sat down inside." "Barnabas!" Merriman said. The voice was very soft, but there was a cold fierceness in it that made Barney sit still as stone. He said in a whisper, "I'm sorry." Simon was paying him no attention. His eyes were glazed, interred, as if he were seeing something that was not there. Barney looked into the Grail for a while, and then the van seemed to go very cold, and it was horrible all of a sudden. He started to talk, but he swallowed. It wasn't his voice that came out. It was different. The way he talked was different too, the kind of words. He said a lot of things I didn't understand, about someone called Anubis and making ready for the great gods. Then he said, "They are here," though he didn't say who he meant. And the painter, the man from the dark, he began asking questions, and Barney would answer them, but in this funny deep voice that just wasn't like his, but like someone else. Simon shifted restlessly. They all sat round him among the great stones, listening, intent, silent. The wind sang softly in the grass around the towering columns. He said, "Who has it?" And Barney said, "The Greenwitch has it." He said, "Where?" And Barney said, "In the great depths in the realm of Tethys, out of reach." The painter said, "Not out of my reach." Barney didn't say anything for a bit, and then he went into his own voice. You could tell he was describing something he could see. He sounded very excited, and he said, "There's this weird green creature, all green, and darkness all round it except one place where there's a terrible bright light, too bright to look at it. It doesn't like you or me or anybody. It won't let anyone come near." The painter was all wound up, so twitchy he could hardly sit still. He said, "What spell will command it?" And all of a sudden it wasn't Barney anymore. His face went empty again, and that other horrible deep voice came out, and it said,
the spell of mana, and the spell of wreck, and the spell of Lear, and yet none of these, if Tethys has a mind against you. For the Greenwitch will be the creature of Tethys very soon now, with all the force of all life that came out of the sea.
Ah, Captain Tom said. Will said sharply, the spell of mana, and the spell of wreck, and the spell of Lear. Are you sure that's what he said? Weary and restful, Simon raised his head and looked at him with dislike. Of course I'm sure. If you'd heard a voice like that coming out of your brother's mouth, you'd remember every word it said for the rest of your life. Will nodded gently, his round face expressionless, and Merriman said impatiently, Get on, get on. The painter came very close to Barney, then whispering, Simon said, I could scarcely hear him. He said, Tell me if I am observed. I thought Barney was going to pass out. He stared into the Grail. His face got twisted, and you could see the whites of his eyes, and then he was all right again, and the voice out of him said, You are safe if you keep from using the cold spells. And the man nodded his head and made a kind of hissing noise and looked very pleased. He leant back in his chair, and I think he asked all he wanted to. And he was going to stop, but all of a sudden Barney sat up very straight, and that horrible voice said very loudly, like shouting, Unless you find the secret of the thing of power in this high part of spring, the Grail must go back to the light. You must make haste before the Greenwitch departs to the great depths. You must make haste. Then it stopped, and Barney sort of slumped down in his chair, and Simon's voice wavered, and he sniffed hard, raising his head. And I grabbed him to make sure he was all right, and the painter was furious and yelled at me. I suppose he thought I'd broken the spell or whatever, so I got cross too and yelled back that he wouldn't get very far when we told you all about this, and he just sat back with a nasty sort of smile and said he only had to snap his fingers and we would forget everything that had happened for as far back as he chose. And Barney did, Jane said shakily, but you didn't. Simon said, We heard Rufus barking outside the door then, so Barney and I both moved to get him, and the dark man jumped up and snapped his fingers once, click, right in our faces. I saw Barney's eyes go sort of vague, and he moved forward very slowly and opened the door as if he was sleepwalking, so I copied whatever he did, because obviously I had to take terrific care the painter didn't suspect I could remember what had happened. Rufus had gone, run away. Barney blinked a bit and shook his head, and almost at once he was talking as if we had just got there a minute or two before, like going back in time, so I tried to do the same. You didn't do too well, Barney said. You looked awful. I thought you were going to be sick. What happened to the Grail? Jane said. I suppose he's still got it. I wouldn't know, said Barney. I don't remember seeing it. I do remember him giving me back my drawing, though. Look. He waved it at Merriman, who took it and twirled it absently in his fingers as he watched Simon. Simon, Jane said, why did the forgetting work on Barney and not on you? It was the drinks, Simon said. This sounds really stupid, but it must have been. We drank some orange soda, and there must have been a kind of potion in it. Clumsy. Merriman said, Old-fashioned, interesting. He looked at Will, and Will looked at him, and their eyes became opaque. But the orange was in sealed cans, Barney said incredulously. That's the only reason we drank it, because he couldn't have put anything in it. And anyway, you didn't even open yours. The spell of mana, Will Stanton said very low to Merriman. And the spell of wreck, and the spell of Lear. No, Barney, Simon said. You actually went and got those drinks twice. Only the first time was one of the things you've forgotten. And though I didn't have any the second time, I did pretend to drink some the first time, so he thought it worked on us both. Will said to Merriman, There's no more time. We must go now at once. Simon, Jane, and Barney stared at him. There was crisp, unboyish decision in his words. Merriman nodded his hawk's face, grim and taut. He said unfathomingly to Captain Tom, Take care of them. And he turned his cold, grim face to Simon and said, You are sure that at the last the voice that came from Barney said, Before the Greenwitch departs to the great deeps? Yes, Simon said nervously. Then it is still here, Will said. And to the children's bewilderment, he and Merriman turned and ran toward the end of the headland and the sea beyond. With swift ease,
With swift ease of animals they ran, the long, lean man and the sturdy boy, an urgent, loping running that took away their age and all sense of familiarity in their appearance. Faster, faster. And at the rocks, ending the headland, they did not pause, but went on. Will leapt up light-footed to the crest of Kamar Head and cast himself outwards into the air, into empty sky, arms spread wide, lying on the wind like a bird, and after him went Merriman, his white hair flying like a heron's crest. For an instant, the two dark-spread, eagled figures seemed to hang in the sky. Then, with a slowness as if time held its breath, they curved downward and were gone. Jane screamed. Simon said, choking with horror, "They'll be killed! They'll be killed!" Captain Toms turned to them, his rosy face stern. He did not lean on his stick. He seemed taller than before. He pointed one arm straight at them, with the 5 fingers spread wide. "Forget," he said. "Forget." They stood poised for a moment, caught out of unawares, and compassionately he watched the terror drain out of their faces and leave them empty, expressionless. He said gently, "The mission for all is to keep the man of the dark from the Greenwitch. The mission for all of us is to keep the man of the dark from the Greenwitch. Will and your great-uncle have gone among the fishermen. One way, we 4 have another way to watch. From your cottage in the grey house. Know this now. Have no fear." Slowly he lowered his arm, and like puppets the children came back to life. "We'd better get going, then," Simon said. "Come on, Jane." "I go with you, Captain, right?" Barney said. "I'll give you some breakfast," Captain Tom said, twinkling at him, leaning on his cane. "It's past time." And that's the end of Chapter 6.